The shattering of glass echoed through Deer Lodge, Montana like a gunshot, sending Gabriella Nash stumbling backward as her reflection splintered into 1,000 fragments. It wasn't the mirror she mourned, but the face that had stared back at her once smooth and admired, now marred by the angry red scars that twisted from her right temple down to her jaw. The year was 1876, and in a world that prized beauty in women above all else, Gabriella had just watched her future crumble along with her reflection. "I simply cannot proceed with our arrangement," Edmund Holloway had declared earlier that day, his refined Eastern accent making his rejection sound almost civilized as he stood in her father's parlor. "The accident has changed things. As if the fire that had ravaged the general store while she'd been trapped inside had merely been a minor inconvenience rather than a moment that divided her life into before and after. The flames had claimed her beauty, but spared her life, a mercy that felt increasingly cruel with each passing day. Gabriella knelt to gather the shattered pieces, barely registering the sting as a sliver of glass sliced her finger. A single drop of blood fell onto the wooden floorboards of her bedroom, joining the tears she refused to acknowledge. She was 22 years old, and according to Edmund, she was now damaged goods, unfit to be the wife of an ambitious banker's son. 3 weeks had passed since Edmund had fled back east with barely concealed relief, leaving behind only the modest engagement ring and a town full of pitying glances. Gabriella had retreated into her father's home on the edge of Deer Lodge, where the small ranch operation he managed provided just enough to keep them afloat after her mother's passing 2 years prior. "Gabby," her father's voice carried up the stairs. "You all right, girl? Heard something break?" "Yes, Papa," she called back, hastily wiping her eyes. Just dropped something." Samuel Nash's footsteps creaked on the stairs anyway. He'd grown more attentive since the accident, hovering like she might shatter at any moment. Perhaps she already had. "The mirror," he said simply when he appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creasing with concern. "I'll clean it up," she murmured, keeping her scarred side turned away from him. Her father crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her despite his bad knee. "Leave it be. You've cut yourself. It's nothing." He took her hand anyway, examining the small cut with the same care he showed to newborn calves in spring. "We need supplies from town. I was thinking you might ride in with me tomorrow." Gabriella stiffened. "I don't think. It's been 3 weeks, Gabby." "You can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding." The lie felt bitter on her tongue. Samuel sighed, his calloused hand squeezing hers gently. "Your mother would have said that life doesn't stop for our sorrows, it just makes room for them to ride along." Mother didn't have to walk through town with everyone staring and whispering. "No," he agreed, "but she faced plenty that would have broken a weaker woman." He stood with a groan, joints protesting. "Think on it. The world's still out there, scarred or not." After he left, Gabriella finished gathering the glass shards, wrapping them carefully in newspaper before disposing of them. She caught a glimpse of herself in the remaining shard of mirror still clinging to the frame. The right side of her face remained untouched, the same hazel eyes and gentle features her mother had passed down to her. But the left side told a different story, one written in angry red lines that pulled her skin taut in places and puckered it in others. That night, she dreamed of fire and Edmund's retreating back. Morning came with the usual sounds: chickens announcing dawn, her father moving about downstairs, the distant lowing of cattle. Gabriella dressed methodically, choosing a high-necked blue calico dress that had once been her second best. She arranged her dark hair to fall forward over the left side of her face, providing what meager concealment she could manage. "I'll come," she announced as she descended the stairs, finding her father at the table with coffee and ledgers. Samuel looked up, surprise giving way to a cautious smile. "That's my girl." The wagon ride into town felt interminable, each rotation of the wheels bringing her closer to the stairs she'd been avoiding. Deer Lodge had grown considerably since the gold rush days, now boasting several proper streets lined with businesses, a schoolhouse, 3 churches, and even a small hotel that catered to travelers heading west. It wasn't a large place by Eastern standards, but it was big enough that Gabriella had once loved market days and social gatherings. "I'll be at the feed store," her father said as he pulled the wagon to a stop near the general store. "You get what we need from Pearson's, and we'll meet back here in an hour." Gabriella nodded, gathering her courage as she climbed down. She kept her eyes lowered as she walked, aware of the momentary pauses in conversation as she passed. The general store's bell jingled cheerfully as she entered, a sound at odds with the sudden hush that fell over the customers inside. "Miss Nash," Mr. Pearson greeted from behind the counter, his voice overly bright. "Good to see you up and about." "Thank you," she murmured, handing him the list she'd prepared. "We need these items, please." While Mr. Pearson gathered her order, Gabriella became painfully aware of Mrs. Whitmore and her daughter Charlotte whispering behind raised hands, their eyes darting toward her and away again. "Such a tragedy," Mrs. Whitmore said, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "Edmund made the right choice, of course. A man in his position simply couldn't be expected to." Gabriella's chest tightened. She considered abandoning the order and fleeing, but the bell above the door jangled again and heavy boots sounded on the wooden floor. "Afternoon, ladies," a deep voice drawled, rich with the sounds of the frontier rather than the East. "Pearson, got that order ready for the double cross?" "Just finishing up with Miss Nash here, Mr. Holcomb," Pearson replied. Gabriella kept her head down, aware of the newcomer's presence behind her, a tall shadow stretching across the floorboards. "No rush," the man said easily. "Fine day to be enjoying the company of Deer Lodge's loveliest." A small, bitter smile twisted Gabriella's lips at the irony. She turned slightly to step aside, keeping her scarred side averted. "Pardon me," she murmured. But as she moved, her carefully arranged hair shifted, revealing what she'd tried so desperately to hide. She froze, waiting for the inevitable reaction, the sharp intake of breath, the averted eyes, the pity or disgust that inevitably followed. Instead, the stranger simply tipped his hat. "Madam." There was no shock in his voice, no change in his relaxed posture. Curiosity made her look up fully, allowing herself to see him properly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of long days outdoors. His dark hair was a touch too long, curling slightly at the collar of his worn buckskin jacket. But it was his eyes that caught her, a startling shade of blue beneath the brim of his hat, direct and untroubled as they met hers. "Victor Holcomb," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Foreman at the Double Cross Ranch." "Gabriella Nash," she replied automatically, years of ingrained manners overriding her discomfort. Something shifted in his expression, not pity but a kind of recognition. "Samuel Nash's daughter. Yes, good man, your father. Helped us out last spring when we lost half our herd in that late blizzard." Before she could respond, Mr. Pearson returned with her parcels. "That'll be $1.63, Miss Nash." As she reached for her coin purse, Mrs. Whitmore's voice carried clearly. "Completely ruined, poor thing. I heard the doctor said the scars would never fade." Gabriella's hands trembled as she counted out the coins, her face burning with humiliation. "Seems to me," Victor Holcomb said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "that some people's beauty runs deeper than skin." The store fell silent. Gabriella looked up to find him watching not her but Mrs. Whitmore, whose face had turned an unflattering shade of red. "Your order, Miss Nash," Mr. Pearson said, pushing the wrapped parcels toward her, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. She gathered them quickly, mumbling her thanks, and turned to leave. Victor Holcomb stepped aside, holding the door for her with an easy courtesy that felt somehow more genuine than Edmund's practiced manners had ever been. Outside, the sunlight momentarily blinded her. She blinked rapidly, adjusting her bundles and preparing to hurry back to the wagon when his voice came from behind her. "Miss Nash." She turned reluctantly, bracing herself. Victor Holcomb stood in the doorway of the store, his broad frame silhouetted against the interior light. He stepped forward, and for the first time, she saw him clearly in the full light of day, the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. The small scar that cut through his right eyebrow, the strength evident in the way he moved. "I meant what I said in there," he told her, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Some folks don't know what real beauty looks like." His eyes held hers steadily, seeing all of her without flinching. "You're the most beautiful thing I've seen in this town." Gabriella stared at him, searching for the mockery or pity that must surely lie beneath his words. She found neither. "You don't need to say such things, Mr. Holcomb," she finally managed. "I know what I am now." "Do you?" He smiled then, a crooked expression that transformed his face. "Because from where I'm standing, you're a woman strong enough to walk back into that store after what happened. That's worth more than any pretty face I've ever seen." Before she could formulate a response, he tipped his hat once more and turned back into the store, leaving her standing in the sunlight with her parcels, and a strange warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. For the first time since the fire, Gabriella found herself thinking not of what she had lost, but of the possibility that something remained, something that even flames couldn't take from her. The wagon ride home passed in silence, but it was different from the tense quiet of the journey into town. Gabriella's mind kept returning to Victor Holcomb's words, turning them over like precious stones, searching for hidden flaws or deception. She found none. "Saw you talking to Vic Holcomb," her father commented as they neared home, his tone carefully neutral. "You know him well?" She asked, trying to sound merely curious. Samuel shrugged. "Well enough. Been foreman at the Double Cross for about 3 years now. Came from Texas originally, I believe. Good with horses, better with cattle, fair man in business. And otherwise." Her father glanced at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "Never heard anything that would make me mistrust him, if that's what you're asking. Keeps to himself mostly, but helps where it's needed." "Why?" "No reason," she said quickly. "He was merely polite." "Polite," Samuel repeated, a smile playing at his lips. "Well, that's something these days." Gabriella turned away, watching the rolling hills that surrounded their small ranch. Summer had turned the landscape golden, the tall grass rippling in waves beneath the afternoon breeze. Their modest house came into view, the barn and corral beyond it, housing the few cattle and horses that comprised their livelihood. For the next 2 weeks, Gabriella found herself thinking of the blue-eyed cowboy at odd moments, while gathering eggs from the henhouse, while mending a tear in her father's shirt, while staring at the ceiling unable to sleep. It was foolish, she knew. One kind comment from a stranger shouldn't occupy so much of her thoughts, especially when that kindness had likely been born of pity. Yet she couldn't quite convince herself it had been pity in his eyes. There had been something else there, something she couldn't name, but that had made her feel seen for the first time since the fire. On a Wednesday morning in early August, Samuel Nash looked up from his breakfast with an expression that immediately put Gabriella on alert. "The fence on the north pasture needs mending," he announced. "I'm heading out there today." "I'll pack you lunch," she replied, already moving toward the pantry. "Actually," he continued too casually, "I've asked for some help. The Holcomb boy from Double Cross is bringing over a few posts and helping me set them. Least I could do is feed him properly." Gabriella froze, her hand on the pantry door. "Mr. Holcomb is coming here, around noon," Samuel confirmed, studiously examining his coffee cup. "Thought you might want to make that berry pie you do so well." She turned slowly to face her father, who had the grace to look slightly abashed at his obvious matchmaking. "Papa, what man works hard deserves a good meal. Besides, it's been too long since you baked. You always loved baking." She had loved it once, before, when flour dusting her cheeks and sugar on her lips had been charming rather than drawing attention to what had changed. "I'll make stew," she said finally. "And biscuits." Samuel's smile was too knowing. "That'll do just fine." By the time the clock neared noon, Gabriella had worked herself into a state of nervous energy that left the house cleaner than it had been in months. She changed her dress twice, before settling on a simple green calico that brought out the flecks of green in her hazel eyes, a detail she told herself didn't matter, even as she pinched her cheeks for color. The sound of approaching horses brought her to the window. Her father and Victor Holcomb rode side by side, several fence posts strapped to a packhorse behind them. In the clear light of day, the cowboy cut an impressive figure on horseback, sitting his mount with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. Gabriella moved away from the window quickly, busying herself with the stew that had been simmering since mid-morning. She heard them in the yard, the low murmur of male voices punctuated by the occasional nickering of horses. The pump squeaked as someone drew water, followed by the splash and vigorous scrubbing that preceded a meal. "Something smells mighty fine," her father called as he entered, Victor Holcomb a step behind him. "Gabby makes the best venison stew this side of the mountains. Is that right?" Victor's voice carried a note of genuine interest. "My compliments to the cook, then." Gabriella turned, wooden spoon in hand, and found those blue eyes on her again. He didn't look away from her scars, but he didn't stare at them either. He simply looked at her as if she were whole. "It's nearly ready," she managed. "Please sit." The men settled at the table while she laid out biscuits still warm from the oven and poured coffee into the good cups her mother had brought from Cincinnati years ago. When she finally joined them with the pot of stew, the conversation had turned to cattle prices and the prospects for the coming fall roundup. "Double Cross is sending a crew north next month," Victor was saying. "Trail driving about 200 head to the reservation. Government contract." "Good money in that," Samuel nodded. "If the weather holds and the Indians don't give us trouble," Victor agreed. "Your beef's better though, Nash. These Montana cattle have better meat than our Texas longhorns." "Fewer of them, though," her father sighed. "Can't compete with your numbers." "Quality over quantity," Victor said, accepting a bowl of stew from Gabriella with a nod of thanks. "Miss Nash, this smells wonderful." "Thank you," she replied softly, taking her seat. The meal proceeded more comfortably than Gabriella had anticipated. Victor spoke easily about ranch matters with her father, occasionally including her in the conversation with a question or observation that indicated he saw her as more than just Samuel's damaged daughter. He had a dry wit that surfaced unexpectedly, drawing genuine laughter from her twice a sound that felt foreign after so many weeks of silence. "Miss Nash," Victor said as he finished his second helping of stew, "your father tells me you're quite knowledgeable about herbs and such." She shot her father a quick glance. "I learned from my mother. She was known for her remedies." "I remember," Victor nodded. Mrs. Nash helped my boss's wife through a difficult childbirth 2 years back. Just before she passed, Samuel said quietly. A moment of respectful silence followed before Victor continued. The reason I ask is we've got a young horse at the ranch, spirited little filly, but she cut herself bad on some wire. Our usual poultice isn't helping much, and I recalled your mother had something special for preventing proud flesh. Comfrey and yarrow, Gabriella said automatically. With a bit of honey if you can spare it, I could. She hesitated, then pressed on. I could make some up for you to take back. I'd be much obliged, Victor said. His eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. I believe in using the right tools for the job, whether it's breaking horses or healing them. After the meal, Gabriella gathered the herbs from her mother's carefully maintained garden while the men returned to the fence line. She worked methodically, grinding the dried comfrey root and yarrow flowers with a mortar and pestle, adding just enough honey to bind the mixture before transferring it to a small glass jar. By the time she heard the men returning, the western sky had begun to glow with the golden light of late afternoon. She stepped onto the porch, jar in hand, as Victor led his horse from the barn. "Mr. Holcomb," she called, more boldly than she'd intended. He altered his course toward her, leading his horse by the reins. Up close, she could see the day's work on him: dust on his clothes, a smudge of dirt across his forearm where he'd wiped sweat away. "The poultice," she said, holding out the jar. "Apply it twice daily after cleaning the wound. Keep it covered if you can." He took the jar, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Thank you kindly, Miss Nash. What do I owe you for this?" She shook her head. "Nothing. We're grateful for your help with the fence." "Then perhaps you'd allow me to repay you another way." He shifted slightly, and for the first time she saw something like uncertainty cross his features. "There's a social at the church come Saturday night. Music, dancing, pie auction for the new schoolhouse roof. I'd consider it an honor if you'd accompany me." The invitation took her completely by surprise. She stared at him, searching again for pity or mockery and finding neither. "I don't. I haven't been to town events since." "I understand if you'd rather not," he said quietly, "but I'd like the chance to know you better, Miss Nash. If you'll permit it." Gabriella glanced toward the barn where her father was deliberately taking too long with the tools, giving them privacy. "People will stare," she said finally, her hand unconsciously rising toward her scars. Victor's gaze was steady. "Let them. I won't be noticing anyone but you." The sincerity in his voice made something flutter in her chest, a feeling she'd thought burned away with her unmarred skin. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I'd like that." His smile transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I'll come by at 6 on Saturday, then." She nodded, suddenly unable to find more words. Victor mounted his horse with the fluid grace of a man who'd done so thousands of times. He settled his hat more firmly on his head, touched the brim in salute, and said, "Looking forward to it, Miss Nash." As he rode away, Gabriella remained on the porch, the golden light of sunset warming her face, both the smooth side and the scarred. For the first time since the fire, she felt something unfurling within her, fragile and tentative as the first green shoot after winter: hope. The days leading up to Saturday passed with excruciating slowness. Gabriella alternated between nervous anticipation and waves of doubt that left her contemplating sending a note to cancel. What was she thinking, agreeing to appear at a social event where the entire town would be present? Where Edmund might be present with whatever Eastern lady he'd inevitably court next. By Saturday morning, she had changed her mind a dozen times, but something kept her from backing out. Perhaps the memory of blue eyes that looked at her without flinching. Or perhaps simply the stubborn Nash pride her father always claimed she'd inherited in double measure from both parents. She spent an hour bathing in water, scented with the last of her mother's lavender sachets, then faced the challenge of dressing for her first social outing since the accident. Her finest dress, the blue silk she'd intended to wear for her engagement party, remained wrapped in tissue at the back of her wardrobe. Instead, she chose a modest gown of sage green cotton, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been her mother's addition the previous summer. Her hair presented another dilemma. For weeks, she'd worn it partially forward to shield her scars, but for dancing, that wouldn't be practical. After several attempts, she settled on a simple style pulled back from her face, with a few soft curls near her temples. The arrangement made her scars fully visible, a prospect that sent a flutter of panic through her stomach, but she forced herself to look in the new small mirror. Her father had quietly hung the previous day. The woman who looked back was changed from the girl Edmund had courted, thinner, more solemn, marked by fire's cruel touch. But her eyes were the same, perhaps even more intense now without her unmarked beauty to distract from their expression. She touched the largest scar gently, tracing its path from temple to jaw. "This is me now," she whispered to her reflection. "This is who I am." When Victor arrived precisely at 6, Samuel answered the door while Gabriella gathered her courage upstairs. She heard their voices, her father's familiar tones and Victor's deeper cadence as she descended the stairs, gripping the banister more tightly than necessary. Both men turned at her approach. Her father's expression softened with paternal pride, but it was Victor's face she searched anxiously. He stood straighter as she entered the room, his hat in his hands, wearing a clean shirt and vest beneath his usual buckskin jacket. His dark hair had been neatly trimmed and combed, and he'd clearly shaved for the occasion. "Miss Nash," he said, and something in his voice made her breath catch. "You look lovely." The words were simple, but the admiration in his eyes was unmistakable. Not pity, not politeness, but genuine appreciation that made her feel suddenly, surprisingly beautiful despite everything. "Thank you, Mr. Holcomb," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "You look quite handsome yourself." A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks at her compliment. "Cleaned up as best I could, didn't want to embarrass you." "You young folks better get going," Samuel interrupted, though he couldn't quite hide his pleased smile. "Gabby be home by 11. "Yes, Papa." Victor offered his arm, and after a momentary hesitation, she placed her hand on it. His solid presence beside her provided unexpected reassurance as they walked to the buggy. He'd brought, a modest but well-kept vehicle with a glossy bay horse in the traces. "Borrowed it from the ranch," he explained as he helped her up. "Thought you might prefer it to horseback." The consideration touched her. "Thank you." As they drove toward town, the setting sun painted the Montana landscape in shades of gold and purple. The evening air carried the scent of pine and prairie grass, cool enough to promise autumn's approach despite the lingering summer warmth. "Nervous?" Victor asked after they'd gone a half-mile in companionable silence. Gabriella considered denying it, then decided on honesty. "Terrified, actually." He nodded, his hand steady on the reins. "I figured as much. Want to know something? So am I." She turned to him in surprise. Why would you be nervous?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Taking the prettiest woman in the county to a social. Man would be a fool not to have a few butterflies." "You don't need to say such things," she said quietly. Victor drew the buggy to a halt, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his expression was serious but gentle. "Miss Nash, Gabriella, if I may, I'm not a man given to false flattery. Never have been. When I say you're beautiful, I mean it plain and simple." His eyes held hers steadily. "The fire marked you, yes. But a person isn't the worst thing that happened to them. They're how they face it afterward. And the woman I see before me now, willing to brave a town full of gossips with her head held high. That's beauty to me. Gabriella felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I'm not as brave as you think. Bravery isn't about not being afraid, he said softly. It's about going forward anyway. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, an understanding that went beyond words. When Victor clicked to the horse and set them moving again, Gabriella felt a curious sense of peace settle over her. Whatever happened at the social, she would face it with this steady man beside her. The church was ablaze with lantern light when they arrived, the sounds of fiddle music and laughter spilling out into the darkening evening. Wagons and buggies lined the road, and well-dressed townspeople streamed toward the white clapboard building. Gabriella's newfound calm wavered at the sight. "We don't have to stay long if you're uncomfortable," Victor murmured as he helped her from the buggy. "Just say the word." She straightened her shoulders, remembering his words about bravery. "I'll be fine." His answering smile warmed her more than any shawl could have. The church hall had been transformed for the occasion, with flowers decorating the tables arranged along the walls and benches pushed back to create a dance floor. A small group of local musicians played near the front, where Reverend Phillips beamed at the gathering crowd. Trestle tables laden with pies and cakes for the auction dominated one corner, overseen by the formidable Mrs. Phillips and her committee of church ladies. Gabriella felt the exact moment when people began to notice her presence. Conversations faltered, heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd. She kept her gaze forward, her hand tight on Victor's arm. "Miss Nash." The enthusiastic greeting came from Lily Peterson, the young schoolteacher who had arrived in Deer Lodge the previous year. "How wonderful to see you. We've missed you at the Ladies' Aid meetings." The simple, genuine welcome nearly undid Gabriella's composure. "Thank you, Miss Peterson. It's good to see you too." "And Mr. Holcomb," Lily continued with a warm smile. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I've seen you at church services." "Miss Peterson," Victor tipped his hat respectfully. "Heard good things about your teaching." "You're too kind," Lily replied. "Now, Miss Nash, you simply must tell me what you think of the decorations." "I was put in charge, you see, and I'm not sure the wildflowers will last the evening in this heat." With that, the initial awkwardness was broken. Lily drew them further into the hall, chattering comfortably about school matters and introducing them to people as if Gabriella's presence was the most natural thing in the world. More than once, Gabriella caught Victor watching her with quiet approval as she gradually relaxed into conversation. Not everyone was as welcoming as Lily, of course. Mrs. Whitmore and her circle kept their distance, their disapproving glances making their feelings clear. Gabriella spotted Edmund's parents across the room, their shocked expressions quickly masked behind polite indifference. "Punch," Victor suggested during a lull in the conversations. "Yes, please." As he moved toward the refreshment table, Gabriella found herself momentarily alone. She was considering whether to follow him when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Gabriella." She turned slowly, knowing who she would see. Edmund Holloway stood before her, as impeccably dressed as always in his Eastern finery, looking as uncomfortable as she felt. "Edmund," she acknowledged, proud that her voice betrayed none of the hurt and anger that surged through her. "I didn't know you'd return to Deer Lodge." He shifted awkwardly. "Arrived yesterday, banking business with father." His eyes skittered away from her face, then back again, unable to settle. You look well." The polite lie hung between them. Before she could formulate a response, Victor appeared at her side, 2 cups of punch in hand. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. Edmund with his pale, indoor complexion and fashionable clothes versus Victor's weathered, capable presence. Mr. Holcomb, Gabriella said, gratitude flooding her. May I introduce Edmund Holloway? Edmund, this is Victor Holcomb, foreman of the Double Cross Ranch. The men sized each other up with the instinctive wariness of territorial animals. Edmund extended his hand first, his banker's son manners winning out. Pleasure, he said without conviction. Victor's handshake was brief but firm. Likewise. An awkward silence threatened until the musician struck up a lively reel and Victor turned to Gabriella with raised eyebrows. "Dance with me." "I'd be delighted," she replied, setting aside her untouched punch. As Victor led her onto the dance floor, she caught Edmund's expression a mixture of confusion and something that might have been regret. But then Victor's hand was at her waist, and they were joining the other couples in the spirited dance. And Edmund Holloway no longer mattered. Dancing had always been one of Gabriella's joys, and she discovered that the fire hadn't taken that from her. Victor proved to be a capable partner, guiding her through the figures with confidence if not polish. When the music transitioned to a waltz, he drew her closer, his hand warm at her waist. "You're a fine dancer, Miss Nash," he murmured as they moved around the floor. "My mother insisted on lessons," she replied. "Said even frontier girls should know how to waltz, wise woman." "She was." Gabriella smiled at the memory. "She'd have liked you, I think. High praise indeed." As they continued to dance, Gabriella became aware that they were being watched not with the pity or revulsion she'd feared, but with interest, and from some quarters approval. She caught Lily Peterson beaming at them, and even Reverend Phillips nodded benevolently as they passed. The evening progressed more pleasantly than Gabriella could have imagined. Victor stayed attentively by her side, engaging her in conversation, introducing her to several of the double-cross hands who treated her with the same straightforward respect their foreman showed. They shared slices of apple pie after Victor made the highest bid in the auction, claiming with a wink that he had a particular weakness for baked goods. It was nearly 10:30 when they finally took their leave, Gabriella pleasantly tired from dancing and more social interaction than she'd had in months. "Thank you," she said softly as Victor helped her into the buggy. "For everything." "My pleasure, Miss Nash," he replied, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. The ride home was quiet, both of them content with their own thoughts as the buggy rolled through the star-lit darkness. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "I haven't enjoyed an evening so much in a long time," Victor said as they approached the Nash ranch. "Nor have I," Gabriella admitted. He drew the buggy to a halt before her house, where a single lamp burned in the front window, her father's signal that he was waiting up. Victor set the brake and turned to her, his expression visible in the soft glow from the house. "Miss Nash, Gabriella, I'd like to call on you again if you're agreeable." Her heart quickened at his words. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Holcomb." "Victor, please." "Victor," she repeated, liking how his name felt on her lips. He climbed down and came around to help her from the buggy. As her feet touched the ground, she found herself standing close to him, close enough to catch the scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "May I write to you?" he asked. "When I'm on the trail, drive north." "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she answered truthfully. His smile in response was worth every moment of anxiety the evening had cost her. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to step away if she wished, Victor raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Gabriella," he said, his voice low and warm in the darkness. "Good night, Victor." She felt his eyes on her as she walked to the house, and when she glanced back from the porch, he tipped his hat before climbing into the buggy. Only after she'd entered the house did she hear the vehicle moving away. Samuel Nash looked up from his book as she entered, his expression carefully neutral. Have a good time. Gabriella crossed to kiss her father's weathered cheek. The best. His answering smile was worth 1,000 words. That night, as Gabriella prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the small mirror. The scars hadn't changed, but somehow they seemed less defining now, less the whole of who she was. She touched them gently, no longer with despair but with something like acceptance. "This is me now," she whispered again to her reflection. But this time, the words felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. Over the next 2 weeks, Victor called at the Nash ranch 3 times. Each visit strengthened the connection between them, revealing shared values beneath their different backgrounds. He brought her small, thoughtful gifts, a book of poetry he'd found in the ranch library, wildflowers gathered on his rides, a handkerchief embroidered with Montana wildflowers he'd purchased from a Cheyenne woman at the trading post. On his 3rd visit, they walked along the creek that bordered the Nash property, talking of their childhoods, hers as an only child in Cincinnati before her parents had sought the promise of the West, his as one of 6 siblings on a struggling Texas farm. "Pa died when I was 14, Victor explained as they paused beneath a cottonwood tree. "Ma tried to keep the place going, but drought took what grief didn't. By 16, I was riding with cattle drives to help support the family." "That's a heavy burden for a boy," Gabriella observed. He shrugged, skipping a stone across the water. "Made me who I am. Can't regret that. And your family now." Ma passed 3 years back. Sisters all married with young'uns of their own. Brothers scattered, one ranching in Arizona Territory, one clerking in San Francisco last I heard. A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my youngest brother in '73, Comanche raid." "I'm sorry," she said softly, placing her hand on his arm. Victor covered her hand with his own. "Life out here takes as much as it gives. You know that better than most." They stood in companionable silence, watching the creek's waters catch the late summer sunlight. When Victor spoke again, his voice held a note she hadn't heard before. "I'll be leaving with the herd day after tomorrow. Trail drive will take 3 weeks, maybe 4 depending on weather and how the cattle behave." "I'll miss you," Gabriella said, surprising herself with her honesty. His eyes, when they met hers, were warm with an emotion that made her heart beat faster. "I've never had someone to come back to before," he said quietly. "It's a good feeling." The day of Victor's departure dawned clear and cool, with the first hints of autumn coloring the distant mountains. Gabriella rose early, packing a basket of food for his journey: biscuits and jerky, dried apples, and a small jar of honey. Her father tactfully disappeared into the barn when Victor arrived just after sunrise. "Just wanted to say goodbye proper," Victor said, standing a respectful distance from her on the porch, his hat in his hands. "I made you some provisions," she replied, indicating the basket. "Nothing fancy, but it might be a welcome change from trail food." His smile was worth the early morning hours she'd spent preparing the basket. "That's mighty thoughtful." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with words neither was quite ready to speak. "I'll write," he promised again. "Be careful," she urged. "The Northern Territories can be dangerous." "I've made this trip before," he assured her. "We know the trails and which bands to avoid. Should be routine." But they both knew that in the frontier, routine could turn deadly in an instant. Indian raids, flash floods, stampedes, injury far from medical help, the list of potential dangers was long and all too familiar. Victor stepped closer, his expression suddenly serious. "Gabriella, I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know. These past weeks have meant more to me than I can say." Her heart thundered in her chest. "For me as well." He reached out slowly, his calloused fingers gentle as they brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch lingered, ghosting over her scarred cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "When I return," he said softly, "there are things I'd like to speak to your father about, if you'd be open to such a conversation." The implication was clear, and joy bloomed within her, unexpected and bright as wildflowers after rain. "I would be very open to that," she whispered. Victor's smile transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes in a way that had become dear to her. With slow deliberation, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture of such gentle reverence that tears sprang to her eyes. "I'll come back to you," he promised against her skin. "I'll be waiting." He collected the basket, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. With a final look that said more than words could express, he mounted his horse and rode toward the double cross, where the trail herd would be gathering. Gabriella watched until he disappeared from sight, her heart fuller than it had been in months, her hand raised to the spot on her forehead where his kiss lingered like a promise. The first letter arrived a week later, carried by a young double-cross hand who'd ridden back to the ranch for additional supplies. Victor's handwriting was surprisingly neat, each letter carefully formed as if he'd taken extra time with it. "My dear Gabriella," it began, and those simple words brought a smile to her face that lasted all day. He wrote of the trail drive, 200 head of cattle moving northward at a plodding pace, the challenges of crossing rivers, the beauty of Montana's vast landscape. He described evening campfires and the songs the men sang, the antics of a young horse he was training, the stars that seemed somehow brighter away from even Deer Lodge's modest lights. "I find myself thinking of you at odd moments," he confessed toward the end. "When the sun catches the golden prairie grass, I remember the color of your eyes. When we pass wildflowers blooming against all odds in rocky soil, I think of your strength. When the night is at its darkest, I recall your smile and find my path again." Gabriella read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in her bureau drawer. That night, she wrote her response by lamplight, filling 4 pages with her thoughts and daily activities, trying to capture the essence of her days for him as he had done for her. September brought cooler nights and the beginning of the aspen tree's golden transformation. Gabriella found herself busier than she had been in months, helping her father with the small harvest from their vegetable garden, putting up preserves for winter, and most surprisingly accepting Lily Peterson's invitation to help with preparations for the school's harvest festival. "You have a wonderful way with the children," Lily commented as they decorated the schoolhouse one afternoon. "Have you ever considered teaching?" Gabriella paused in hanging a garland of colorful leaves. "I hadn't, no. You should." The school board is considering adding an assistant teacher next year. The town is growing, and 28 pupils is simply too many for one person to manage properly. The suggestion planted a seed in Gabriella's mind that she found herself returning to frequently. Before the fire, her future had seemed set: marriage to Edmond, a comfortable life as a banker's wife, children of her own. Now, possibilities she'd never considered were presenting themselves. 2 more letters arrived from Victor over the following weeks, each more open in expressing his feelings than the last. In his 3rd letter, carried by a returning hunter who'd crossed paths with the trail drive, he wrote words that Gabriella read and reread until she had memorized them. "I've known many kinds of hunger in my life: the literal hunger of lean years on my family's farm, the hunger for knowledge that books occasionally satisfy, the hunger for purpose that my work sometimes fulfills. But I've never known the kind of hunger I feel for your presence until now. It's a space inside me shaped exactly like you, and nothing else will ever fill it." October arrived with the first dusting of snow on the distant peaks, and no word from Victor for nearly 2 weeks. Gabriella tried not to worry, reminding herself that communication from the trail was unpredictable at best. Still, she found herself watching the road more often than necessary, straining to hear hoofbeats that didn't come. "Should have been back by now," her father commented one evening as they sat by the fire. "Unless they had trouble with the crossing at Fort Benton." "Or the Indians," Gabriella said quietly, voicing the fear they'd both been avoiding. Samuel's weathered face creased with sympathy. "Victor Holcomb knows what he's about, girl, not his first drive." "I know." She forced a smile. "I'm just being foolish." "Not foolish to care for someone," her father countered gently. 3 more days passed with no news. On the 4th morning, Gabriella was gathering eggs when she heard a rider approaching at speed. Heart in her throat, she rushed to the front of the house, half hoping to see Victor. Instead, she found young Jimmy Watson from the Double Cross, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Miss Nash," he panted, swinging down from the saddle. "Got a message from the boss. Trail drives back, but there's been trouble." "Victor." The name escaped her before she could stop it. Jimmy's expression confirmed her fears. "Took an arrow in the shoulder during a skirmish with some renegade Blackfeet. He's alive," he added quickly, seeing the color drain from her face. "Doc Simmons is with him at the ranch, but he's asking for you." "I'll saddle the horses," Samuel said, appearing at her side. "Gabby, get what medical supplies we have." The ride to the Double Cross seemed interminable, though in reality it took less than an hour at the pace they set. Gabriella's mind filled with terrible images: Victor pale and still, Victor fevered and delirious, Victor slipping away while she raced to reach him. The Double Cross main house came into view at last, a substantial 2-story structure that spoke of the ranch's prosperity. Several men stood outside, their expressions solemn as Gabriella and her father approached. Miss Nash, the ranch owner, Howard Blackfield, stepped forward to help her dismount. "He's inside. Doc's with him." "How bad?" Samuel asked quietly. "Arrow went clean through the shoulder," Blackfield replied in the same low tone. "But it's gone bad. Infection set in on the trail. Doc's doing what he can, but—" He glanced at Gabriella, then back to Samuel, his expression grave. "I need to see him," Gabriella said firmly. Blackfield nodded. "This way." He led them into the house and up a wide staircase to a bedroom at the end of the hall. The smell hit her first, the metallic tang of blood mingled with the sharper scent of antiseptic and the unmistakable odor of infection. "Doctor." Simmons looked up from the bedside as they entered, his expression lightening slightly at the sight of her. "Miss Nash." "Good. He's been asking for you." And then she saw him, and her heart constricted painfully. Victor lay still against white sheets now stained with blood and sweat. His normally tanned face was pale and drawn, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with perspiration. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, but a telltale redness had already seeped through the white linen. "Fever's high," Dr. Simmons said quietly. "I've cleaned the wound as best I can, but the infection is advancing. I've seen men survive worse, but the next day or two will tell." Gabriella barely heard him, her attention fixed on Victor's face. As if sensing her presence, his eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes bright with fever but still unmistakably his. "Gabriella," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You came." She moved to the bedside, taking his right hand between both of hers. "Of course I came." A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. "Must look a sight." "I've seen worse," she replied, attempting lightness despite the fear clutching at her heart. "Liar," he murmured, but his fingers tightened around hers. Dr. Simmons touched her shoulder. "Keep him quiet. I've left laudanum for the pain, but use it sparingly. Fever's making him confused enough as it is." If you can get him to drink, do so. I'll be back in the morning unless I'm needed sooner." After the doctor departed, Gabriella took stock of the situation with the practical efficiency her mother had instilled in her. She sent her father to fetch her herb basket from their horse, then set about making Victor more comfortable bathing his face with cool water, helping him take small sips from a cup, speaking softly to him when fever dreams made him restless. The story of the attack emerged in bits and pieces over the hours that followed, related partly by Victor in his lucid moments, and partly by ranch hands who came to inquire after their foreman. The trail drive had reached the reservation without incident and completed the transfer of cattle to the government agent. On the return journey, they'd encountered a small band of Blackfeet who had apparently been involved in a raid on a nearby settlement. The ensuing skirmish had been brief but violent, with Victor taking an arrow while protecting one of the younger hands. "Should have seen him," young Jimmy said admiringly from the doorway. "Arrow hit him and he just broke it off, kept fighting. Wouldn't let us turn back for a doctor until we were sure everyone was safe." Gabriella wasn't surprised. It fit everything she knew about Victor's character. Night fell, and still she maintained her vigil. Her father brought food she couldn't eat and eventually retired to a guest room Blackfield had provided, extracting a promise that she would wake him if needed. Left alone with Victor, Gabriella continued her ministrations, whispering prayers her mother had taught her long ago. Near midnight, Victor's fever spiked dangerously. He thrashed against the bedclothes, calling out names she didn't recognize, comrades lost in past conflicts perhaps, or family members long gone. Gabriella held his hand through it all, cooling his burning skin with damp cloths and murmuring reassurances when fear clouded his eyes. "Don't leave me," he gasped during one particularly difficult moment, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. "I'm here," she promised, pressing her lips to his knuckles. "I'm not going anywhere." Somewhere in the darkest hours of the night, as she applied a fresh poultice of herbs to his wound, Gabriella realized a fundamental truth. She loved this man. Not with the shallow affection she'd felt for Edmond, but with something deeper and more enduring, a love forged in shared understanding of life's hardships and joys. "You have to fight, Victor," she told him as she worked, her fingers gentle on his fevered skin. "I'm not losing you now that I've found you." Whether he heard her or not, she couldn't tell. But as the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, she noticed that his breathing seemed easier, his skin a touch cooler beneath her hand. "Doctor." Simmons confirmed her observation when he arrived an hour later. "Fever's breaking," he announced after examining Victor. "Wound looks better too. You've got a healing touch, Miss Nash." "He's strong," she replied, not taking her eyes from Victor's face. "That he is." The doctor packed his bag. "With continued care, I believe he'll recover fully. The shoulder may give him trouble in cold weather, but otherwise." Relief washed over Gabriella in a wave so powerful she had to grip the bedpost to remain standing. "Thank you, doctor." After Simmons departed, promising to return the following day, Gabriella finally allowed herself to sink into the chair beside the bed. Exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, and she drifted into sleep with her hand still resting lightly on Victor's arm. She woke to the sensation of fingers gently stroking her hair. Opening her eyes, she found Victor watching her, his gaze clear for the first time in more than a day. "Hey there," he said softly. Gabriella straightened, immediately alert. "How do you feel?" "Like I lost a fight with a bear," he admitted with a weak smile. "But I'm guessing it could be worse, considering." "It nearly was," she said, unable to keep a slight tremor from her voice. Victor's expression sobered. "I'm sorry for frightening you. You should be." She tried for stern but couldn't maintain it, relief overwhelming everything else. The next time you decide to be heroic, perhaps consider dodging. His laugh turned into a wince as it jarred his injured shoulder. I'll keep that in mind. Gabriella helped him drink from a cup of water, her hand supporting his head. When he lay back against the pillows, his eyes held hers with newfound intensity. They told me you've been here since yesterday, haven't left my side. I couldn't be anywhere else, she admitted simply. Victor reached for her hand, his grip weak but determined. When I was out there with the arrow in me and the fever coming on, I had one clear thought: I needed to make it back to you, whatever it took. Tears blurred her vision. And you did. I told you I would. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I keep my promises, Gabriella. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Samuel Nash entered, his expression lightening considerably at the sight of Victor awake and alert. Good to see you rejoining the land of the living, Holcomb, he said gruffly. Had us worried. Takes more than an arrow to keep me down, sir, Victor replied. Samuel looked between them, noting their clasped hands with a knowing expression. Gabriella, you need rest yourself. I'll sit with Victor while you get some sleep in a proper bed. She started to protest, but Victor squeezed her hand. Your father's right. You look exhausted. I'll be here when you wake up. Another promise, she asked softly. His eyes held her steadily. My word on it. Victor's recovery progressed steadily over the following days. By the end of the week, he was able to sit up in bed for short periods, and by the 10th day, Dr. Simmons permitted him to walk as far as the window with assistance. Through it all, Gabriella remained at the Double Cross, returning home only briefly to collect fresh clothing and additional supplies. It was during the 3rd week, as they sat together on the ranch house's wide porch enjoying the crisp October sunshine, that Victor broached the subject they'd both been circling. I've been thinking about the future, he began, his good arm resting comfortably alongside hers on the porch swing. About what I want from life. Gabriella's heart quickened. And what have you concluded? That I'm tired of being a hired man, taking orders and driving other people's cattle. He turned to face her more fully. I want something of my own. Land, a home. He paused, his blue eyes serious as they held hers. A family. Those are worthy aspirations, she said softly. Blackfield's offering to sell me a piece of the Double Cross, the eastern section, about 500 acres with good water access. Says I've earned it with 5 years of honest work. Pride colored his voice. It would be a modest start, but enough to run a small herd, build a house. That sounds wonderful, Victor. He took her hand, his expression intensifying. It would be with the right partner. He drew a deep breath. Gabriella, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but out here, life doesn't always give us the luxury of time. I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day in Pearson's store when you held your head high despite everything. And every day since has only confirmed what I already knew. Tears blurred her vision as happiness welled within her. I love you too. Victor's smile was radiant. Then would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building that life with me? It won't always be easy, but I swear to you, you'll never doubt my love or my respect. Yes, Gabriella whispered, her heart so full it felt it might burst. Yes, I'll marry you. He leaned forward to kiss her, then their first true kiss, gentle but filled with promise. His hand came up to cradle her face, thumb brushing over the scars without hesitation or revulsion, as if they were simply another part of her to be cherished. When they parted, breathless and smiling, Victor reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. It's not fancy, he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple silver band set with a small, twinkling sapphire. Belonged to my grandmother. Ma gave it to me before she passed, said to save it for the woman who captured my heart. It's perfect. Gabriella breathed as he slipped it onto her finger. Absolutely perfect. Later that afternoon, Victor formally asked Samuel for his daughter's hand, a request granted with evident pleasure. Plans were made, with the wedding set for the first week of December, giving Victor time to fully recover and begin work on their future home. Nothing elaborate, Gabriella insisted when Lily Peterson immediately began discussing wedding arrangements. Just family and close friends. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Deer Lodge, met largely with approval and good wishes. There were exceptions, of course. Mrs. Whitmore was overheard remarking that beggars can't be choosers within Lily's hearing, earning herself a surprisingly sharp rebuke from the usually mild-mannered schoolteacher. Edmund Holloway, to Gabriella's surprise, sent a polite note of congratulation before departing once more for the East, this time permanently. The gesture, small as it was, helped close that chapter of her life with something approaching peace rather than bitterness. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Victor recovered his strength rapidly, soon able to oversee the construction of a modest but sturdy cabin on his newly purchased land. Gabriella divided her time between assisting her father, preparing her trousseau, and helping Victor plan for their future. On a particularly fine November day, Victor drove her out to see the progress on their home. The cabin stood in a protected hollow with a clear view of the eastern mountains, its log walls nearly complete. "It's not much yet," Victor said as he helped her from the wagon. "But by spring, we'll add another room, maybe a proper front porch for summer evenings." Gabriella walked through the partially completed structure, envisioning curtains at the windows, a stove for cooking and warmth, a table where they would share meals and conversation. "It's going to be wonderful," she said, turning to find Victor watching her with naked adoration. "It's just a cabin," he replied. "It's the beginning of our life together." She moved to stand before him, taking both his hands in hers, and that makes it the most beautiful place in the world. December arrived with a light dusting of snow and final preparations for the wedding. The ceremony itself, held in the small church where they had danced together months earlier, was everything Gabriella had hoped for: simple, meaningful, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared for them. She wore a new dress of deep blue wool, with her mother's lace collar, and the cameo her father had given her as a wedding gift. Victor cut a handsome figure in a new suit, his recently trimmed hair and closely shaved face making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable as he waited for her at the altar. When the time came to speak their vows, Gabriella turned fully toward the congregation, her scarred face clearly visible to all. No longer something to hide, but simply part of who she was, the woman Victor Holcomb had chosen, the woman who had found her strength in the aftermath of loss. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Phillips declared with evident satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride." Victor's kiss was tender but sure, a promise of all that lay ahead for them when they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Holcomb for the first time. The applause that greeted them felt like a blessing, a community's acknowledgement that some things, once broken, could be remade into something even more precious. The celebration continued at the Double Cross Ranch House, which Howard Blackfield had generously offered for the occasion. There was music and dancing, abundant food and drink, and more genuine goodwill than Gabriella had felt in one room since before the fire. As the evening progressed, she found herself momentarily alone, watching Victor across the room as he laughed with her father and several ranch hands. Lily Peterson appeared at her side, offering a cup of punch. "He can't take his eyes off you, you know," the schoolteacher observed. "Even when he's engaged in conversation with others," Gabriella smiled, having noticed the same thing. "I'm very fortunate." "It's not fortune," Lily countered gently. "It's recognizing true worth when he sees it. Not everyone has that gift." She touched Gabriella's arm lightly. "Have you considered my offer about the assistant teaching position? The school board has approved the funding." "I have, actually. I'd like to accept if the position can accommodate a married woman's schedule." Lily's face lit up. "Absolutely. We can discuss the details after the new year." She squeezed Gabriella's hand. "You'll be wonderful with the children." Victor appeared then, claiming his wife for another dance. As he led her to the center of the floor, his eyes never left her face. "Happy, Mrs. Holcomb," he murmured as they began to waltz. "Completely," she assured him. "And you?" His answer was in his kiss, brief but filled with promise, heedless of the good-natured cheers that rose from the onlookers. Later that night, after the guests had departed and they had made the journey to their new home, Victor carried Gabriella across the threshold of the cabin with careful reverence, despite his still healing shoulder. "Welcome home," he said, setting her gently on her feet in what would be their living area. A fire had been laid in the stone fireplace by thoughtful friends, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings they'd acquired. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. Victor moved behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he pressed a kiss to her temple directly over the worst of her scars. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered against her skin. And in that moment, with his love surrounding her, Gabriella believed him completely. Spring came to Montana in fits and starts, with late snowfalls giving way to sudden warm days that coaxed the first wildflowers from the soil. By April, the land around the Holcomb cabin had transformed from winter's barren palette to vibrant green, dotted with the yellows and purples of early blooms. Gabriella had settled into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease. 3 days a week, she rode into Deer Lodge to assist Lily at the school, finding unexpected fulfillment in helping young minds discover the joy of learning. The remainder of her time was split between tending their home and helping Victor with the small herd of cattle they'd begun to build. Victor had proven to be exactly the husband she'd hoped for: kind, steadfast, and unfailingly supportive. His pride in her teaching was matched only by his evident admiration for her growing skills with the livestock. Together, they were building something neither had fully possessed before: a true partnership based on mutual respect and deep affection. On a particularly fine May morning, as they sat on the newly completed front porch watching the sun rise over the eastern mountains, Victor reached for her hand. "I've been thinking," he began, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in what had become a familiar, comforting gesture. "A dangerous pastime," she teased. His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes in the way she loved. "I'm serious, Gabby." She squeezed his hand. "What is it?" "I want to formally adopt the Nash name for our ranch." He looked at her, his expression earnest. "Your father's been working someone else's land all these years, building something he could never truly call his own. I'd like to honor him and you by making this place Nash Ranch, if you approve." Emotion welled within her at his thoughtfulness. "He'd be deeply touched, Victor, as am I." "Good," he nodded, clearly pleased. "And there's something else." His hand moved to rest gently on her abdomen, a question in his eyes. "Is there something you might want to tell me? You've been different lately. In the mornings especially." Gabriella's eyes widened. She'd been waiting for the right moment to share her suspicions, wanting to be more certain before giving voice to such hopes. "I think," she began carefully, covering his hand with her own, "that by Christmas, Nash Ranch might have a new, very small resident." The joy that transformed Victor's face was something she knew she would remember all her days. He gathered her carefully into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "It seems so," she replied, her own happiness mirrored in his eyes. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased," he laughed, the sound rich and full. "Gabriella, you've already given me more happiness than I ever thought possible. This is—" He shook his head, seemingly at a loss for words. "I know," she said softly. "I feel the same way." They sat together as the sun rose fully, hands entwined, contemplating the new life growing within her, a life born of their love. Another chapter in the story that had begun with a chance meeting in a general store nearly a year before. Later that day, they rode to her father's ranch to share the news. Samuel's eyes grew suspiciously bright as he embraced his daughter and shook his son-in-law's hand with vigor. "A grandchild," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Your mother would have been so proud, Gabby." That evening, as they rode home beneath a vast Montana sky painted in shades of purple and gold, Gabriella felt a contentment so complete it bordered on awe. From the ashes of what she'd thought was her ruined life had risen something far more precious than she could have imagined, a love that saw beyond surfaces to the truth beneath. A partnership built on genuine respect, a future filled with possibility. Victor reached across the space between their horses to take her hand, as if needing the physical connection to confirm the reality of their happiness. "No regrets?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. It was a question he'd asked before, always with the same underlying concern that she might someday wake and wish for the different life she might have had, the unblemished face, the banker husband, the Eastern comforts. Gabriella's answer hadn't changed, nor would it ever. "Not one," she assured him, knowing it for absolute truth. As they approached their cabin, the setting sun bathed it in golden light, transforming the simple structure into something that seemed to glow from within, much like the love that had grown between a scarred woman who had feared her life was over, and the cowboy who had seen beauty where others saw only damage. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holcomb," Victor said as he helped her from her horse. "Home," Gabriella agreed, her hand resting briefly on her still flat abdomen where their child grew, the most beautiful word in the language. His eyes, when they met hers, held all the love and promise she could ever want. "No," he corrected gently, drawing her into his arms. "The most beautiful is your name." As his lips met hers in the fading light of day, Gabriella knew with bone-deep certainty that some scars were visible and some were hidden, but with the right person beside you, all could become part of a greater beauty, the beauty of a life fully and courageously lived, of a love that saw beyond surface to soul. And that, she thought as she leaned into her husband's embrace, was the most beautiful thing of all.